Welcome back. Tonight's story is about a woman who watched a stranger marry her dying grandmother inside a memory care unit to steal a 90-acre farm, smiled through the whole ceremony, and then walked into the county courthouse with a folder no one knew existed. Pour the coffee. Stay close. My grandmother's caregiver married her in a nursing home ceremony to inherit the farm, so I pulled the capacity evaluation from the same week. My name is Joanna Reese Whitaker. I am 46 years old. I live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and for the last 19 years I have worked as an adult protective services investigator for the county. I have seen sons cash their mother's Social Security checks while the mothers ate cold soup in dark kitchens. I have seen daughters sell wedding rings off swollen fingers. None of it prepared me for the morning my cousin Lindsay called me at 6:14 a.m. and said the words, "Grandma Ruth got married last night." I was standing barefoot on the cold tile of my kitchen. The coffee had not finished brewing. I could smell the burnt edge of the pot and hear the soft tick of the old wall clock my grandmother gave me when I bought this house. Lindsay was crying in a way that sounded like laughing. I asked her to say it again. She said it again. A man named Curtis Mallory, the overnight aide from the memory care wing, had married my grandmother in the activity room at 7:30 the night before. There was cake. There was a witness. There was a marriage license already on its way to the county clerk. I did not cry. I did not yell. I sat down on the kitchen floor and I thought about the folder in my office drawer. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from tonight. I want to know who is with me on this one. The Whitaker farm sits 11 miles outside Lancaster on a road that still does not have a streetlight. 90 acres of corn and hay and one stubborn apple orchard my grandfather planted the year my mother was born. The farmhouse is white, with a green tin roof and a porch light that has been on every single night since 1971. My grandmother Ruth turned that light on the day my grandfather went to Vietnam, and she never turned it off, not even after he came home, not even after he died, not even after the dementia started eating the edges of her memory like a slow tide. From the outside, we looked like a postcard, the kind of family that brings 2 pies to a church potluck and writes thank you cards by hand. My grandmother wore her hair in a low bun and smelled like the lavender soap she ordered from a catalog in Vermont. She kept butterscotch candies in a glass dish by the door. She called every child in the family her good one, even the ones who were not. But the rot was there. It was always there. My Uncle Dale, my mother's older brother, treated that farm like a checking account he had not yet been allowed to open. He had been waiting for my grandfather to die for 30 years, and when my grandfather finally did, in the spring of 2019, Dale started showing up at the farmhouse with paperwork, refinance options, reverse mortgage brochures, a nice young man from a development company who wanted to talk about subdividing the back 40. My grandmother would smile and offer him butterscotch and pour him sweet tea and say, "Dale, honey, this land was your father's father's land. We are not selling a single stone." He would smile back. He would call her stubborn. He would say it the way some men say beautiful, like it was a compliment with a knife inside it. The second warning came the winter my grandmother forgot the word for spoon. She was stirring sugar into her tea, and she held up the small silver one and she said, "Joanna, what is the name of this thing?" I told her. She laughed. She said, of course, my mind is just tired tonight." Dale was there. He was watching her over the rim of his coffee mug. He did not laugh. He filed something away behind his eyes, and I saw him do it, and I did not understand yet what I was seeing. I should have understood. That is the part I will carry for the rest of my life. The triggering moment came on a Tuesday in March. My grandmother had been moved into the memory care wing at Brookline Pines 6 weeks earlier after she wandered out of the farmhouse in her nightgown at 2 a.m, and a state trooper found her sitting on the white line of Route 30 talking to a man only she could see. Dale arranged the placement. Dale signed the intake paperwork. Dale, who lived 20 minutes away, suddenly visited 4 times a week, and then Dale went quiet. For 11 days, no calls, no texts, no Sunday drop-ins at my mother's house. When he resurfaced, he was cheerful in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. He told my mother that Grandma had made a special friend at Brookline. a kind man, an aide, someone who sat with her and read the Psalms out loud, someone who made her smile again. My mother, who is gentle and tired and has trusted her brother her entire life, said, "Oh, Dale, that is so sweet." I asked his name. Dale said, "Curtis." I asked his last name. Dale said, "I do not remember." I asked how old he was. Dale said, "Does it matter?" I asked if Grandma had a new power of attorney form on file. Dale's smile did not move, but something behind it did. He said, "Joanna, you do not have to investigate every kind thing that happens in this family." That was the sentence. That was the moment my stomach dropped through the floor of my body and kept falling. The wedding happened 9 days later. I need to slow down here, because this is the part I have practiced telling without breaking, and I still have not figured out how. The ceremony took place on a Thursday evening in the activity room at Brookline Pines. There were 11 residents in folding chairs, most of them dozing. There was a sheet cake from the grocery store on Route 222, the cheap kind with the blue gel roses that bleed into the frosting. There was a witness, a woman named Brenda Coyle, who worked the front desk and later told me she had been told it was a renewal of vows ceremony for a sweet old couple. There was an officiant, a man Curtis Mallory had found on the internet for $149. My grandmother wore a pink cardigan over her nightgown. She had not been bathed that day. Her hair was not in its bun. Someone had put a plastic tiara on her head. She was 83 years old. She weighed 96 pounds. 4 days earlier, on the Monday of that same week, the staff neuropsychologist at Brookline had administered a standard cognitive assessment because my grandmother had stopped recognizing her own daughter. The score placed her 2 full standard deviations below the legal threshold for capacity to enter into a contract. She could not name the year. She could not name the president. She could not, when shown a picture of a key, tell the examiner what a key was used for. 4 days later, she said the word yes in a folding chair, while a man 38 years younger than her slid a ring onto her finger that he had bought at the mall for $62. She thought he was my grandfather. I know this because Brenda Coyle, the woman at the front desk, told me later that my grandmother kept calling him Hank. My grandfather's name was Hank. He had been dead for almost 7 years. My grandmother smiled the whole ceremony. She held Curtis Mallory's hand and she said, "Hank, I knew you would come back for me. I knew it. I knew it." Curtis Mallory said, "I do." He had been employed at Brookline Pines for 14 weeks. He had a prior conviction in Ohio for financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult that the staffing agency had somehow not caught. He had been working overnight shifts on the memory care wing for exactly 41 nights. And on the morning after the ceremony, he walked into the Lancaster County Clerk's office with a marriage license and a quiet smile. And he became, on paper, the legal husband of Ruth Eleanor Whitaker, owner of 90 acres of farmland appraised the previous year at $1,400,000. I sat on my kitchen floor and I looked at the wall clock my grandmother had given me, and I thought, you waited too long. You saw it coming and you waited too long, and now a stranger owns your grandfather's apple orchard. The rescue, if you can call it that, came from a woman I had never met. Her name was Marisol Vega. She was a registered nurse on the day shift in the memory care wing, 2 years from retirement, a grandmother herself. She had been off the night of the ceremony. She came in Friday morning and she saw the plastic tiara still sitting on the side table next to my grandmother's bed, and she asked what it was for, and Brenda Coyle, still believing the renewal of vows story, told her the sweet thing that had happened. Marisol Vega did not say a word to Brenda. She walked down to the records room. She pulled my grandmother's chart. She read the Monday cognitive assessment. She walked back to the nursing station and she picked up the phone and she called the County Adult Protective Services hotline. The call came into our office at 9:47 a.m. It was routed by the intake supervisor, who did not yet know the family name, to the on-call investigator. The on-call investigator that morning was me. I want you to understand something. I could have recused myself. I should have recused myself. The ethics protocol is clear, and I have taught that protocol at trainings for younger investigators for 9 years. But when I saw the name Ruth Eleanor Whitaker come up on my screen, and I saw the words suspected marriage fraud and undue influence in the complaint field, I did not feel like an investigator. I felt like a granddaughter who had been handed the only door she was ever going to be given. I closed my office. I called my supervisor. I told her exactly who the alleged victim was. I asked her to assign a second investigator as the lead and to let me serve as a family witness. She said yes. She said, "Joanna, take a breath." I took one. It did not help. If you have ever watched someone you love be turned into a transaction by people who smiled while they did it, drop a 1 in the comments. I want to know I am not alone in this. The lead investigator assigned to the case was a woman named Patrice Hollander. She had been doing this work for 26 years. She did not speak quickly, and she did not waste motion. She came into my office at 10:30 that morning, and she sat in the chair across from my desk, and she said, "Joanna, I am going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer it as an investigator and not as a granddaughter. Did Brookline Pines administer a capacity evaluation on your grandmother in the week preceding the marriage?" I said yes. She said, "Where is it?" I said, "In the records room at Brookline. I requested a copy 3 weeks ago for an unrelated guardianship consultation my mother had asked me about. It is in my locked drawer, in a manila folder, with the date stamp of Monday afternoon, 4 days before the ceremony." Patrice Hollander looked at me for a long moment. She said, "Joanna, that folder is going to end this marriage by the end of the month." I did not cry then either. I just nodded. And I thought about my grandfather and the apple orchard and the porch light that had been on for 55 years, and I thought, "Hank, I am going to bring her home." The months that followed were the slowest and the steadiest of my life. I had been single for 4 years by then, since my divorce from a kind man named Eli who deserved more attention than my caseload allowed me to give. I had a small house on a street with old maples. I had a rescue beagle named Pepper who slept on my feet. I had a younger sister, Caroline, who lived in Harrisburg and called me every Sunday at 4 in the afternoon without fail. I leaned on all of them. I sat at my kitchen table with Patrice Hollander on 3 separate evenings while she walked me through the case the way you walk a child through a dark hallway, with patience and one hand on the wall. She filed the report with the State Attorney General's Elder Justice Unit. The state, not my family, became the petitioner for annulment because the state had jurisdiction the moment a mandated reporter documented capacity findings. Dale could not block it. Curtis Mallory could not contest it without exposing himself. I kept working. I kept showing up. I visited my grandmother every Tuesday and every Saturday. I brought her butterscotch candies in a small paper bag. I held her hand and I read to her from a worn copy of a Mary Oliver book she had kept on her nightstand since 1994. Some days she knew me. Some days she called me Hank. Some days she called me by my mother's name. I did not correct her. I just held her hand and I waited. I started taking long walks at the farm on weekends. The porch light was still on. The apple orchard was budding. I walked the back 40 in my grandfather's old rubber boots, and I picked up stones, and I built a small cairn at the edge of the tree line. 1 stone for every Tuesday I visited her. By the end of summer, the cairn was as tall as my knee. The state filed the annulment petition in late June. The hearing was scheduled for the 2nd week of October. I waited. In the 1st week of October, 3 days before the hearing, my Uncle Dale called me. I had not spoken to him in 7 months. His voice was thin. He said, "Joanna," he said, "can we talk?" He said the development company had pulled out. He said Curtis Mallory had stopped returning his calls. He said the staffing agency had been served with a subpoena. He said, "Joanna, this has gotten out of hand. This was supposed to be a simple thing. A simple thing." That is the phrase he used. I told him I would see him in court. The hearing was held in a small wood-paneled courtroom on the 2nd floor of the Lancaster County Courthouse. It was raining. I wore a navy blue suit I had bought for my grandfather's funeral. My mother sat in the 2nd row holding a tissue she never used. Caroline sat beside her. Dale sat across the aisle in a brown jacket that was too big for him. Curtis Mallory did not appear. His attorney appeared for him and said his client had relocated to Florida and would not be contesting the petition. The judge asked the state to present its evidence. Patrice Hollander stood up. She walked to the bench. She placed the manila folder on the table. The Monday assessment, the date stamp, the licensed neuropsychologist's signature, the score 2 full standard deviations below capacity, the examiner's note that the patient could not identify a key. The judge read it. The whole room was quiet. I could hear the rain on the tall windows. The judge looked up. She said, "The marriage is annulled, effective immediately and retroactive to the date of the license." She said, "The property of Ruth Eleanor Whitaker is restored in full to her estate." She said, "The court will refer this matter to the district attorney for review of criminal charges against Curtis Mallory and any party who facilitated the ceremony with knowledge of the victim's incapacity." Then she looked at my Uncle Dale. She did not say his name. She did not have to. She said, "This court does not take lightly the exploitation of an elder by those entrusted with her care, including by blood." The room got smaller. The state's attorney asked if any family member wished to make a victim impact statement. I stood up. I walked to the front of the room. I did not look at Dale. I looked at the judge, and then I turned, and I looked at my uncle, and I said the only thing I had been practicing for 7 months. I said, "Dale, you told me, the day I asked about the power of attorney, that I did not have to investigate every kind thing that happens in this family. I want you to know that I heard you. I heard you the first time, and I heard you every time after, and I want you to understand that what you called kind, the state of Pennsylvania has now called a crime. The thing my grandfather built with his hands over 53 years is going to outlive you the same way it outlived him. You are not getting the orchard. You are not getting the back 40. You are not getting the porch light. The only thing you are getting from this family, from this day forward, is the silence you taught my grandmother to live in." I sat down. The judge let the silence hold for a moment. Then she closed the file. "If you have stayed with me until now, thank you. Tell me in the comments what part of the story stayed with you the most." I drove home that night through the rain on the long road that has no streetlights. The wipers were going, the radio was off. I thought about the little girl I had been, the one who used to sit on that porch with my grandmother shelling peas into a metal bowl, the one who believed that the people who loved you would never put a price on you. I said to her, out loud, in the dark car, I said, "Sweetheart, being wanted by broken people is not the same as being worthy of love. The people who tried to sell what your grandfather built did not see you. But I see you, and Grandma sees you on the days she can, and Hank saw you every day of his life. You were never the thing they were measuring. You were the one keeping the light on." I pulled into the long gravel drive at the farm. The porch light was on. It is still on tonight. It will be on tomorrow night. My grandmother passed 7 weeks after the hearing, in her sleep, in the memory care room she finally recognized as hers again. The orchard is in a trust now, in her name and in my grandfather's, and in mine. Some folders do not destroy a family. Some folders just tell the truth a family was already living.